everyone, welcome back to Sgcarmart. So, almost exactly 6 years ago, I was right here in Lisbon, Portugal for the launch of the brand new BMW X2. Now, 6 years on, we have a new one. Well, two new ones. So, we have the second generation petrol-powered X2, and alongside it, we have its all-electric twin, the brand new BMW iX2. Now, a lot about the new X2 has changed, starting first and foremost with its size. So this is a much bigger car than before. So compared to its predecessor, it's 194mm longer, 21mm wider, and 64mm taller. And that means that this is a much bigger car. And just for some context, right? So compared to the new X1, this car is actually 54mm longer, although it is 52mm shorter in height. And this particular M35i variant, this one is even slightly longer. So this is actually quite notable and quite important. So if you actually compare the previous generation X2 and X1, the X2 was actually a shorter car than the X1. With this new one, this X2 is now a longer car, which means that in a very, very real way, this car has sized up. And of course, the design is also dramatically different. So with the old X2, that really was kind of a big hatchback, right? This new one really fully embraces that modern coupe crossover look. And does it look like a shrunken X4? Yes, it does. Now let's go take a closer look at some of the details and see what else is new on this X2. So, of course, we have a brand new front end, right? So it's a really upright one, and we have a brand new grille design. Personally, I think it's quite well executed. I think it looks quite nice, and it is also illuminated. And of course, we also have new headlights. Now, of course, this tapered roof leads to this really sharp and muscular rear end, and it is quite distinctive, right? On this M35i model, we also get quad tailpipes. Now, we do have to talk about boot space. So like I mentioned, this is a bigger car, and that actually translates to more space, right? So this car actually has a 560-litre boot, and that's actually bigger than the X1. Now, inside the new X2, if this cabin looks familiar, it's because it is, right? It is effectively and essentially the same one you'll find in the X1. And that's a good thing, right? So we have a curved display running OS 9. It's a good improvement on the OS. I like it. I think it's a much better and much easier to use compared to OS 8. And of course, we have this digital cluster here, which you can configure to see a whole bunch of stuff. And on this particular model, we also have a heads-up display. So this being an M performance model, of course, you are going to get some M parts, right? So we have the M steering wheel with the M pedal shifters, and you have a little boost mode over here. We also have Alcantara stitching across quite a number of surfaces in the cabin, and we also have these M Sport seats. Beyond that, the rest of the cabin is functionally familiar, right? So we have this same center console, we have this massive charging pad, USB-C ports, but again, nothing out of the ordinary and what you expect from a modern compact class BMW. So, important question, how does this feel on the road? Well, let's go drive this car and find out. Alright, so I'm now driving the X2 M35i. So some numbers, right? So 2-litre engine up front, 296 brake horsepower, 400 Newton meters of torque. And this is a brisk car. So 0 to 100 takes 5.4 seconds, and it feels pretty much like that. So if you put your foot down, yep, it's quick, it's quick. Now, there's that obvious question of what's the ride quality like? Because with the previous X2, it was, I would say, quite a firm riding car. So it really was trying to embrace that hot hatch, feeling. This new one feels quite similar. So this is an M performance model. So you get the M adaptive suspension with a lowered ride height of 15mm. And yes, it's quite firm riding, so I'm just in the normal setting, and even though it feels quite sporty, I've tried it in sport, and honestly it's probably a little bit too much, right? But as far as handling goes, I must say it's quite impressive. So we've done a bit of mountain road, some nice curves, and it holds itself quite well. You can really push the car pretty hard through corners. Obviously, most X2 drivers aren't going to be driving somewhat crazy like I am right now, and that's the other thing about this particular model, right? So I cannot actually evaluate what the perhaps normal one would be like, because Singapore is primarily going to be getting the X2 xDrive30, and we do understand that this M35i model will eventually be offered. But for most people, the sort of go-to model will probably be the Cat A model, right? So is this very indicative? Not particularly. But I will say that yes, at least from a dynamic perspective, it's definitely much sportier than an X1, which is already quite a good handling car. So, you know, the X2 still manages to have that little bit of USP, right? It's that more sporty, more aggressive sibling to the X1. Now, we do also have to talk about the fact that this is a bigger car and it certainly feels like it on the road. So again, I can't help comparing with the previous one, right? So this one really feels like you're taking up a little bit more space on the road. You look out and yeah, you're taking up quite a lot more tarmac, right? One thing I do have to point out, visibility is not particularly great. So, you know, it's fine up front, it's fine through your wing mirrors, but if I check my blind spot here, I see the B pillar, and then if you look in the rearview mirror, the rear hatch window is honestly pretty small. Now, of course, this may be a sporty model, but no one's going to be driving it very, very hard all the time, right? So how does it function as a day-to-day, daily car? I think it's quite good. Again, it's on the firm side, so you do have to accept that about this car, but it does come with a whole bunch of assistance systems that can make your life very easy. So one particular one that I do like, which you can get with quite a lot of the BMW models now, is the augmented reality view. So basically I have navigation set up, and you know, when you're reaching a junction, a roundabout, well, we have roundabouts here in Portugal, not that much in Singapore, it will actually show you on the screen with a live feed video where you're supposed to turn, you know, how far away it is, and it also shows up in your heads-up display. So, you know, you have that convenience about this car, right? And of course, you have your, you know, cruise control, you have all the things that you might need on a day-to-day basis. So it is quite well equipped, and again, that is of course a matter of equipment. And here we have the iX2, and if you're thinking it looks just like the X2, well, you're right, the cars look essentially the same. Specifically, this is also in the M Sport trim, so you're gonna have the same M Sport exterior trim elements. However, look a little bit closely and one particular thing is different, and that would be this grille. So this is an EV and therefore it has a closed-off grille, and this actually has the same triangle motif that we first saw in the iX. Now let's check out the boot. So here we have a 525-litre boot, so it's actually a little bit smaller than the X2, but it is worth pointing out that it is actually bigger than the iX1. Now let's go check out the inside of the car and see if anything is different. Inside the iX2, it is basically identical to the X2 that we drove previously. The only difference is that because, you know, this isn't the M Performance model, you have slightly different things, right? So you don't get an Alcantara, you don't get that steering wheel with the two pedals, but beyond that, function-wise, everything is the same. Now, I do suspect though that on the road, the X2 and iX2 are going to be quite different, so let's go drive this car. Alright, right now I'm driving the iX2, so you get two motors that produce a combined 309 brake horsepower and 474 Newton meters of torque. And to be very clear, this is not the variant Singapore's going to be getting. We will be getting the xDrive30. So that will be your single motor with significantly less power because of a very, very simple and important reason, which is COE. Immediately, the car feels kind of different, right? I think the most significant difference is that ride quality. So this is the M Sport variant, but it kind of has your normal mechanical setup. So we don't have the adaptive dampers, we don't have the low ride height. And consequently, the ride quality is actually a lot better. It's still firm, you know, it's still not the cushiest in the world, but I would say it's a lot more forgiving than the M35i that I just drove previously. That being said, this car is still plenty fast. On paper, it's slower to 100 by like 0.2 seconds, but honestly, in every real-world situation, this is easily as quick as the M35i. And you know, it's one of those things where, yeah, you put your foot down, you don't hear an engine kicking in, right? But you still get that sense of acceleration, that pull, and you know, we're along the highways. I'm doing a number that I will not say on camera, and it feels like there's plenty to give. You know, it's, yeah, it can keep pulling, and it's quite impressive actually. So ride stability is actually very good. So we're cruising along at a big number, and it still feels very planted, it still feels very stable, and I think that's quite impressive with this car, right? In terms of handling, how does it feel? It doesn't feel quite as sporty as the M35i, and I think that's to be expected, right? This doesn't have that same mechanical setup. You know, the steering is definitely much lighter. It feels like a more forgiving car for everyday use, and I do think as a result, this has quite a different character from the X2, right? So in a way, I think that's a good thing, because you don't want the iX2 to just be a pure carbon copy of what your X2 is, right? It has to have its own thing, and yeah, I think it's quite nice, actually, quite nice to drive. So obviously we have to talk about range. So this car has a 64.8 kilowatt hour battery with a claimed range of 449 km. So 64.8 isn't the biggest battery you'll ever find in a car, but you know, with BMW's latest eDrive technology, I would say that the range is quite a believable number. Of course, it's going to be a little bit optimistic depending on what kind of driving you're doing, but as a whole, I think 400 km, I think that's very achievable on a single charge. Now, some quick concluding thoughts about the new BMW X2 and iX2. So we do have to go back to the original X2, a car that was, you know, bold, rebellious, and quite unique in a sense, right? And I did like that about the car. However, I also have to admit that it is a tough sell, right? As a sales proposition, it was a tricky car to try to sell. Now, this new one is definitely going to be more accessible to more people, because from a practicality and functionality standpoint, it is at least, I would say, on par with an X1 or iX1. And of course, you know, dynamically, this X2 or iX2 is going to be in many ways quite similar to the X1 or iX1, because, you know, they are fundamentally built on the same mechanical package, but this is definitely geared a little bit more towards sportiness. And certainly with this new generation X2, it has improved in terms of its overall capability, functionality, and dynamic capability. And it is a step forward. It is quite a big step forward for the model. And you know, whether it's the X2 or the iX2, I think these are very, very capable cars. But ultimately, the choice of an X2 or X2, I think, will come down to two important things. One is styling, and the second is pricing. So I think the main reason people would pick an X2 over an X1, or in this case, an iX2 over an iX1, is to do with the way the car looks. And honestly, if you ask me, I think this new generation X2 and iX2 definitely look more interesting than the equivalent X1 or iX1. You know, it looks sharper, it looks more dynamic, and it's just less run-of-the-mill, right? It's not just another box on wheels. And that counts for something. Of course, the second question is, how much is that worth? How much is that styling difference worth to you as a buyer? And you know, that's a question that only you can answer. And of course, we will do much more thorough reviews of these cars when they are launched in Singapore. Alright, so those are some initial impressions of the new X2 as well as the iX2. Of course, stay tuned for our reviews of these cars when they are launched in Singapore. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do remember to like, share and subscribe to our channel, and you can also hit the notification bell so you will be alerted of all our upcoming videos. And of course, do also find us on TikTok at Sgcarmart. So yes, that's all I have for you here in Lisbon. I'll see you back home. Bye! Woo! Alright. Different, right? So with the older X, really upright grille, and this new grille design is of course. Now we do have to talk about the boot space. Forgot where the button was. Can you do that again?